The June sun of 1854 beat down upon the New Mexico territory as Martha Lindell watched her family's wagon recede into the distance. Dust swirled around her 70-year-old frame, while sweat traced paths down her weathered face, stinging eyes already raw with disbelief. The half-filled canteen at her feet seemed to mock her enough water to prolong her suffering, not enough to save her life. "Please?" she whispered, her parched lips cracking. The wagon's silhouette grew smaller against the horizon, the creaking of its wheels fading into silence. Her daughter Rebecca's desperate cries had vanished, overcome by the sharp crack of Elijah's whip, driving the oxen forward. Martha's fingers, gnarled by decades of arthritis, clutched at the dirt beneath her knees. 6 months of arduous travel across half a continent had led to this abandonment in a wasteland where vultures already circled in anticipation of her demise. She hadn't noticed the eyes watching from behind a cluster of sun-bleached rocks. Tatanka, a Lakota warrior, whose muscular frame belied his silent approach, had been tracking the wagon train for 3 days. His mission was reconnaissance, monitoring white settlers encroaching on his people's hunting grounds. He hadn't expected to witness such calculated cruelty among their own kind. Martha collapsed forward, gray hair falling across her face as consciousness began to slip away. The vultures descended lower, their circles tightening. A hot gust of wind stirred the sand around her prone form, small eddies dancing across her outstretched hand. Tatanka's decision formed in that moment. Observation would yield to intervention, regardless of his elders' warnings about entanglements with white settlers. He moved silently across the rocky terrain, rifle ready, but lowered. When he was 30 paces from the old woman, a warning rattle stopped him mid-step. A rattlesnake, disturbed by Martha's collapse, had coiled between them, its diamond-patterned body tensed to strike. The reptile's tail buzzed its warning as its head weaved, hypnotically fixated on the helpless woman. Tatanka raised his rifle in one fluid motion. The crack of the shot shattered the desert silence. The snake's head disappeared in a spray of blood, and scales, its body writhing briefly before going still. Martha jerked upright at the sound, momentarily revived by terror. Her vision, blurred from dehydration, could barely make out the tall figure approaching through heat-distorted air. As he drew closer, details emerged: 2 long braids adorned with feathers, intricate beadwork on buckskin clothing, red ochre markings on his face. A Lakota warrior. The embodiment of countless cautionary tales told around settler campfires. Martha tried to crawl away, but her limbs refused to cooperate. She closed her eyes, waiting for the killing blow, wondering if death by tomahawk might be more merciful than slow dehydration. Instead, she heard the soft thud of something landing beside her. Opening one eye, she saw a water skin within reach. The warrior gestured for her to drink, then mimed the action himself. When Martha hesitated, he picked up the water skin, took a small sip, and offered it again, proving it wasn't poisoned. Survival instinct overcame fear. Martha snatched the water skin and drank greedily, feeling life flow back into her desiccated body. The warrior motioned for her to slow down, and she reluctantly complied, knowing too much water too quickly could make her sick. As the liquid revived, Martha's thoughts cleared enough for her to wonder why this man had saved her. Before she could attempt communication, his head snapped up, attention drawn to something in the distance. Moments later, Martha heard it too. Gunshots, followed by a woman's scream that she recognized with horrifying certainty as Rebecca's voice. My daughter, Martha, struggled to rise, maternal instinct temporarily overwhelming physical weakness. The warrior restrained her with a firm but gentle hand. More gunshots echoed across the plains, followed by a man's shout abruptly cut short. Martha's heart constricted. My grandchildren. She whispered desperation, giving her strength to struggle against the warrior's grip. But he was immovable, understanding something Martha refused to accept: whoever was attacking her family's wagon. Neither she nor he could reach them in time. His urgency became apparent when he pointed to the horizon, where dust clouds signaled riders approaching rapidly. He gestured for Martha to follow him away from both the wagon and the oncoming riders. No, Martha protested weakly. "I can't leave them." The warrior's expression grew stern. He pointed again at the dust cloud, then made a cutting motion across his throat. Whoever was coming meant death. When Martha still hesitated, he scooped her into his arms with surprising gentleness. Her resistance was token her body had no strength left for true defiance. As he carried her toward a rocky outcropping that promised shelter, Martha glimpsed the riders over his shoulder. Not Indians, but white men, rough-looking, heavily armed. Bandits, then. The very danger she had warned Elijah about when he insisted on taking this isolated shortcut. The warrior set Martha down in a natural depression between two massive boulders, pressing her firmly to the ground before taking up a position where he could observe the approaching men without being seen. "They's got to be around here somewhere," a harsh voice called. "That old woman couldn't have gotten far on foot. Maybe the heat got her already." Another replied with callous indifference. "Saved us the trouble." "Boss wants to be sure," the first voice insisted. "No witnesses," he said. "Our employer was mighty specific about that." Martha's blood ran cold. Employer? Had these men attacked her family's wagon after Elijah abandoned her? Was that what she'd heard? The bandits spread out, searching the area. One man rode directly toward their hiding place, his horse's hooves kicking up small clouds of dust. Martha held her breath as the warrior beside her tensed finger, moving to his rifle's trigger. The bandit paused mere yards from their position, scanning the landscape. "Nothing here but rocks and rattlers," he called to his companions. "Let's check the gully to the east." As the riders regrouped and moved away, Martha released her breath. The warrior remained vigilant until the bandits were distant specks, then turned his attention back to her. He offered water again, which Martha gratefully accepted. Through gestures, he indicated they needed to move. The bandits might return. When Martha attempted to stand but failed, he disappeared briefly, returning with a painted horse that had been hidden nearby. He helped her mount, then swung up behind her. As they rode away, Martha cast one last look toward where her family's wagon had disappeared. A thin column of smoke rose in the distance, confirming her worst fears. Grief threatened to overwhelm her. But a more immediate question demanded attention. Why had a Lakota warrior chosen to save her? And where was he taking her now? The desert landscape transformed as day faded to evening. Harsh flatlands gave way to rugged terrain, with mesas rising like red sentinels against the darkening sky. A lone coyote watched their passage from atop a wind-carved stone formation, its eyes reflecting the last golden light. The warrior guided his horse with expert precision through narrow passages where rocky walls provided blessed shade. Martha drifted in and out of consciousness fever, beginning to claim her after hours of exposure. When they finally stopped at a shallow cave in the base of a sandstone mesa, she was barely aware of being lifted down from the horse and carried inside. The cave's interior was cool and dry. The warrior arranged her on a bed of grasses, then built a small fire near the entrance. Through fever-hazed vision, Martha watched him gather plants from outside, crushing some into poultices for her sunburned skin, and brewing others into a bitter tea that he encouraged her to drink. As night deepened and the temperature plummeted, the desert's paradox, he draped a buckskin across her shoulders. The simple kindness nearly undid her. "Thank you," Martha whispered, tapping her chest. "Martha Lindell." The warrior observed her carefully, then mirrored her gesture. "Tatanka." "Tatanka." Martha repeated the unfamiliar name, awkward on her tongue. A ghost of a smile crossed his face before his expression grew serious again. He moved to the cave entrance, scanning the darkness outside with evident concern. "What is it?" Martha asked, forgetting momentarily that he couldn't understand. Tatanka made a series of gestures, men on horses circling back. The bandits were still hunting. He carefully banked the fire to minimize its light, then moved Martha deeper into the cave, where shadows would conceal them. For hours they sat in near darkness, listening. Occasionally, Martha heard distant hoofbeats or voices carried on the night wind. Tatanka remained vigilant, one hand always near his weapons, until exhaustion finally claimed Martha, and she fell into restless sleep. She woke to gray pre-dawn light and the aroma of something unfamiliar brewing over a rekindled fire. Tatanka offered her a crude wooden cup containing an herbal tea that tasted bitter but revived her strength. Her fever had broken during the night, and though weak, her mind was clear. He gestured toward her feet, then to the cave entrance, asking if she could walk. Martha nodded, though uncertainty plagued her. She couldn't remain in this cave indefinitely. But what awaited outside? With Tatanka's support, she made her way to the entrance, where his horse was saddled and waiting. The eastern sky blazed with sunrise colors, transforming the desert into a landscape of gold and crimson. For a moment, Martha forgot her grief in the face of such stark beauty. Tatanka helped her mount, then paused, scanning the horizon with narrowed eyes. Martha followed his gaze to a thin column of smoke rising in the distance, not in the direction her family had traveled, but southward. "Is that them, the bandits?" she asked, pointing. Tatanka shook his head, making a circular motion with his finger that Martha interpreted to mean it was a camp. He pointed in that direction, then made a cutting motion across his throat. The meaning was clear enough. Whoever was camped there was dangerous, but Martha felt compelled to investigate. If there was any chance her family had survived, she pointed toward the smoke. "We should go there. My family might be there." Tatanka frowned clearly, understanding her intent. He shook his head emphatically. Martha pointed again more insistently. "Please, I need to know." After a moment's hesitation, Tatanka mounted behind her and turned the horse toward the distant smoke. Though his posture remained tense and his hand stayed near the knife at his belt. As they approached, Tatanka guided the horse into a stand of scrubby trees for cover. He dismounted and helped Martha down, motioning for her to stay hidden while he scouted ahead. Though she nodded agreement as soon as he disappeared into the brush, Martha began carefully following. She had to see for herself. Crawling painfully on arthritic hands and knees, Martha reached the edge of a clearing and froze at the sight before her. The bandits had made camp beside a stagnant waterhole, passing a bottle around a morning fire. But what seized Martha's attention was her family's wagon positioned at the edge of the camp. Its canvas cover riddled with bullet holes, dark bloodstains marring the wooden sides. Of her family there was no sign. Tatanka materialized silently beside her, his expression grim as he placed a restraining hand on her shoulder. But Martha had to know for certain. "My daughter," she whispered, pointing to the wagon. "My grandchildren." Tatanka's grip tightened as he shook his head slowly, eyes conveying what words could not. Martha felt something break inside her chest, a pain more physical than any illness. A bandit approached the wagon, reached inside, and pulled out Emma's rag doll, the one Martha had sewn for her last Christmas. Its once clean pinafore was now stained dark with blood. "Look at this," he called to his companions. "Souvenir from that little girl. Put up quite a fight for such a small thing." The bandits laughed, tossing the doll between them, before one threw it into their fire. Martha watched her grandchild's treasured possession blacken and curl in the flames, as something hardened inside her grief, crystallizing into hatred so pure it left no room for fear. "Too bad about that silver locket," another bandit said. "Boss will be furious we lost it during the attack. It was real pretty, had engravings inside and everything." "What locket?" the youngest bandit asked. "The one our employer gave as down payment. Said it was a family piece." Martha's breath caught. Rebecca's locket, a family heirloom passed down from her grandmother. She never removed it, not even to bathe. The only way these men could have it was if Elijah had given it to them. But why would he? She would have charged into the camp weaponless and outnumbered had Tatanka not physically restrained her, one hand clamped firmly over her mouth to prevent her cries from alerting the bandits. He dragged her backward through the brush until they were safely out of earshot. Only then did he release her, Martha collapsed to her knees, body shaking with silent sobs. "They killed them," she gasped. "My family. They're all dead." Though Tatanka couldn't understand her words, her meaning was clear. He knelt beside her, his expression solemn. After allowing her a moment to grieve, he touched her shoulder, indicating they needed to move. The bandits were too many, and too well armed for any thought of confrontation, at least for now. Martha nodded numbly, allowing him to help her to her feet. As they made their way back to the horse, a twig snapped behind them. Tatanka spun knife drawn, but was too late to prevent the figure that burst from the underbrush from colliding with Martha, sending them both tumbling to the ground. Martha found herself staring into a face she recognized all too well. Elijah Whitman, his once handsome features contorted with desperation, had found them. "You," Martha gasped, shock momentarily overriding grief. Elijah. Her son-in-law's clothes were torn and filthy, his face streaked with dirt and dried blood. His eyes darted wildly between Martha and Tatanka, who had recovered from his surprise and now stood with knife at the ready. "You're supposed to be dead," Elijah hissed, scrambling backward until his spine pressed against a tree trunk. "You were meant to die out there." The accusation hung in the air between them, stripping away any pretense that Martha's abandonment had been anything but deliberate. "Where is Rebecca?" Martha demanded, finding strength in rising anger. "Where are my grandchildren?" Elijah's face twisted. "Gone, all gone. Those bastards back there ambushed us not an hour after we left you. I tried to outrun them, but—" He broke off, voice cracking. Martha's eyes narrowed. "You ran. You left them to save yourself." "What was I supposed to do?" Elijah snapped. "Fight off 8 armed men by myself." Martha recalled Elijah's oft-told tale of surviving a Pawnee attack years ago, how he'd proudly described himself as the only survivor of his father's hunting party. At the time, she'd attributed it to luck or providence. Now she wondered if his survival had more to do with cowardice than fortune. Before she could voice the thought, a voice called from the direction of the bandit camp. "Someone's out there, I heard voices." Tatanka gripped Martha's arm, urging immediate retreat. Elijah's eyes fixed on the Lakota warrior's painted horse visible through the trees. "I saw an Indian trailing us days ago," he said quickly. "That's your horse, isn't it? I need it. Now. After what you've done?" Martha's voice trembled with fury. "You think I'd help you escape? And I don't need your help." Elijah snarled, drawing a pistol from his belt. His hand moved to Rebecca's pocket, where Martha had often seen him fingering something on the journey, perhaps plotting this moment even then. "Step aside, Mother Lindell. I'm taking that horse with or without your blessing." Tatanka, reading the threat in Elijah's posture, moved with lightning speed. But Elijah was faster, firing his pistol with practiced ease. The shot caught Tatanka in the shoulder, spinning him backward. Martha's scream echoed through the trees before she could stop herself. "Shut up!" Elijah hissed, swinging the gun toward her. For a terrible moment, Martha saw in his eyes the calculation would eliminating the final witness be worth the noise of another shot. His finger tightened on the trigger. Martha didn't think. She lunged forward, grabbing a fallen branch and swinging it toward Elijah's head with all her remaining strength. He ducked, but the distraction was enough. Tatanka, despite his wound, threw his knife with unerring accuracy. The blade embedded itself in the tree inches from Elijah's ear, causing him to fire wildly into the air. "You're both dead," Elijah snarled, backing away. "Those bandits will find you, and if they don't, the desert will—" He turned and disappeared into the trees, opposite the direction of the approaching bandits, whose shouts indicated they'd heard the gunshot and were coming to investigate. Martha dropped to her knees beside Tatanka, who was pressing his hand against his bleeding shoulder. "We have to go," she urged, tugging at his uninjured arm. Tatanka nodded grimly, allowing Martha to help him to his feet. Together, they staggered toward his horse as the first bandits burst into the clearing behind them. There they are," a voice shouted. "Don't let 'em get away." Tatanka boosted Martha onto the horse with his good arm, then swung up behind her despite his injury. He kicked the animal into motion as bullets whined past them, guiding it into a dry wash, where overhanging banks provided some cover from their pursuers. They rode hard for several miles, following the serpentine course of the wash. The hoofbeats of pursuing horses echoed behind them, sometimes closer, sometimes farther, but never entirely gone. Martha's heart pounded in rhythm with the horse's galloping stride, each jarring impact sending pain through her aged joints. "They're gaining," she called over her shoulder as the sounds grew louder. Tatanka urged the horse to greater speed, but the animal was tiring its coat lathered with sweat. Ahead, the wash narrowed dangerously, barely wide enough for the horse to pass. As they entered this natural bottleneck, a bullet ricocheted off the rocky wall inches from Martha's head, showering her with stone fragments. "How many bullets do they have?" she gasped, ducking lower. Tatanka didn't answer, focusing instead on navigating the treacherous passage. The wash floor was littered with debris from previous flash floods, branches, stones, even the bleached bones of an unfortunate steer that had been caught in rising waters. Just as they emerged from the narrowest part, dark clouds that had been gathering unnoticed on the horizon unleashed their fury. Rain fell in sheets so thick Martha could barely see Tatanka's hands on the reins before her. Lightning split the sky, followed almost instantly by a thunderclap that made the horse rear in terror. For a heart-stopping moment, Martha felt herself slipping sideways from the saddle. Tatanka's injured arm shot out, catching her shirt and hauling her back to safety with a grunt of pain. "Thank you," she gasped, clutching the saddle horn with white-knuckled intensity. Their pursuers had paused at the entrance to the narrow passage, unwilling to risk the same treacherous route. But the reprieve was temporary. They would simply ride around and intercept their quarry on the other side. More immediate danger presented itself as the first surge of floodwater rushed down the wash behind them. What had been dusty ground seconds before was now a churning, muddy torrent carrying debris before it like battering rams. "Higher ground," Martha shouted, pointing to a slope that offered escape from the rising water. Tatanka guided the exhausted horse toward it, but the animal's hooves slipped on the suddenly slick earth. It stumbled, nearly going down, before regaining its footing. The water was at their fetlocks, now rising rapidly. They reached the base of the slope just as a massive wall of water rounded the bend behind them. Tatanka dismounted with fluid grace despite his injury, then reached up to help Martha down. Her foot caught in the stirrup as she swung her leg over, causing her to fall awkwardly into his arms. The impact sent fresh blood flowing from his shoulder wound, but he made no sound of complaint. Together, they scrambled up the slope, the horse following instinctively. They were perhaps halfway up when the full force of the flash flood struck the wash below. The roar was deafening, drowning out even the thunder overhead. Martha turned to look and immediately wished she hadn't. A solid wall of churning brown water filled the wash from bank to bank, carrying whole trees and boulders in its destructive path. Had they been caught in it, they wouldn't have survived for 10 seconds. "Keep climbing," Tatanka urged in broken English, surprising Martha momentarily before she remembered the more urgent task at hand. They reached a ledge perhaps 20 feet above the flood and collapsed onto it, gasping for breath. The horse found its own perched nearby sides, heaving with exertion. "You speak English?" Martha said when she could form words again. Tatanka nodded. "Some. Learn from traitors. Why didn't you tell me before?" "Not know if trust you," he replied simply. "White people, not always honest." Martha couldn't argue with that assessment, especially given Elijah's actions. "Your shoulder, it needs tending." The bullet had passed clean through a blessing and curse. No lead remained to poison his blood, but 2 wounds instead of 1 needed treatment. Using her petticoat, Martha tore strips for bandages. She cleaned the wound with rainwater, applied pressure until the bleeding slowed, then bound it tightly. Night found them huddled beneath an overhang as the storm continued unabated. Lightning illuminated the landscape in staccato bursts, revealing the floodwaters still raging below. Tatanka's skin burned with fever infection taking hold despite Martha's efforts. "We need better shelter," she said more to herself than to him. "And medicine for your wound." Tatanka, drifting in and out of consciousness, nodded toward a small pouch at his waist. Martha opened it to find dried herbs and roots. Through a combination of halting English and gestures, he showed her how to prepare poultices and teas from these supplies. The herbs helped, but by morning, his condition had worsened. The wound was angry and inflamed his fever dangerously high. Martha knew from frontier experience that the wound needed cauterizing, a desperate but necessary measure. "I need to burn the wound closed," she explained, mimicking the action to ensure understanding. Tatanka nodded grimly. "Yes, must burn. Clean." Martha built a small fire, using what dry kindling she could find beneath their overhang. She placed his knife in the flames. While it heated, Tatanka bit down on a piece of leather from his medicine pouch, preparing for the pain to come. When the knife glowed red-hot, Martha's hands trembled violently. She had assisted her husband with similar procedures on injured farmhands years ago, but never performed one herself. One slip could cause irreparable damage. Tatanka, sensing her hesitation, caught her wrist with surprising strength. His dark eyes met hers, communicating trust and determination. He guided her hand to the correct position, then released her, bracing himself. Martha took a deep breath and pressed the hot blade against the wound. The sizzle of burning flesh and Tatanka's muffled scream were sounds she knew would haunt her dreams. She held the knife in place until the wound was sealed, then quickly repeated the process with the exit wound before her courage failed. Tatanka passed out from the pain, giving Martha time to prepare fresh poultices and bandages. When she finished, she sat back against the rock wall, utterly spent. The storm had moved on, leaving a transformed landscape in its wake. The wash below was still running high, but no longer the raging torrent of the previous evening. From their elevated position, Martha could see for miles across the desert. There was no sign of the bandits, but that didn't mean they had abandoned the chase. By midday, Tatanka's fever had broken. He was weak but clear-eyed when he awoke. "We must move," he said. "Not safe here." "You're in no condition to travel," Martha protested. "Bandits still hunt," he replied grimly. "Better to move slow than die here." He was right, of course. They were exposed on the ledge, visible from a considerable distance. With Martha's help, Tatanka managed to stand, though he swayed dangerously for a moment before finding his balance. The horse had survived the night as well, though it looked as exhausted as they felt. They made their way carefully down to where the floodwaters had receded enough to cross. The going was treacherous mud, sucked at their feet, and debris created obstacles at every turn. Twice, Martha nearly fell, saved only by Tatanka's quick reflexes, despite his injury. They had just reached the opposite bank when a shout echoed across the landscape. 3 riders had appeared on the ridge they had vacated, having finally tracked them down. "Run," Tatanka urged, pushing Martha toward a narrow gap between 2 massive boulders. They squeezed through just as bullets began kicking up mud around their feet. The passage twisted unexpectedly, opening onto a maze of similar corridors formed by ancient rockfalls and erosion. It was a natural labyrinth that might save them or trap them permanently. "Do you know the way through?" Martha asked as they hurried along, choosing passages at random. "No," Tatanka admitted, "but neither do they." For hours they navigated the stone maze, guided only by Tatanka's instinct to keep moving eastward, where he believed his people might be found. Behind them, they occasionally heard the shouts of their pursuers, sometimes alarmingly close, sometimes distant. The bandits had dismounted to follow on foot, unwilling to give up their prey. Late afternoon found Martha and Tatanka emerging onto a high plateau overlooking the surrounding landscape. The storm had passed, stars appearing between dispersing clouds. In the distance to the east, Martha could see a line of hills that promised better shelter than their current exposed position. But between them and that safety lay open ground, with minimal cover, a killing field if the bandits emerged from the maze behind them. What now? Martha asked, helping Tatanka sit on a boulder to rest. Need shelter, food. He looked around, then pointed east. Hills there, many caves. How far? Half-day walk, hard country. Martha assessed their situation. Tatanka needed rest and proper medical care. Their water would last another day at most. The bandits would undoubtedly continue tracking them. Yet something had changed within her since witnessing the aftermath of her family's murder. The grief remained a constant ache in her chest, but alongside it had grown a steely determination. She would not die here. She would not let this man, who had saved her, die either. We'll rest until dusk, she decided. Then make for the hills under cover of darkness. As night fell, they began their dangerous crossing. The moon, nearly full, cast enough light to navigate by, but also made them more visible to anyone watching. They moved from one patch of cover to another, a cluster of boulders, a dry wash, a stand of scrubbed juniper. Each time they paused, listening intently for any sound of pursuit. They were perhaps halfway across when Tatanka suddenly pulled Martha down beside him, his finger to his lips. Seconds later, she heard what his keener senses had already detected: voices carrying on the night air. Through a gap between rocks, Martha watched 3 shadowy figures moving along their back trail. The bandits had emerged from the maze and were casting about for signs of their passage. The leader was a pockmarked man she recognized from their camp, his face set in lines of frustrated determination. They couldn't have gotten far, he was saying to his companions. Not with the Indian wounded. Maybe they died in the flood, suggested the youngest bandit, barely more than a boy with a wispy attempt at a beard. No such luck, the leader replied. Boss wants proof they're dead, especially that old woman. Too many loose ends already. They passed within 20 yards of Martha and Tatanka's hiding place, close enough that Martha could smell the tobacco one of them was chewing. She held her breath, certain they would be discovered, but the darkness and their stillness proved sufficient camouflage. When the bandits had moved on, continuing westward on their incorrect assumption of Martha and Tatanka's direction, Martha released her breath in a shaky sigh. We got lucky, she whispered. Tatanka's expression was grim. Luck ends soon. They circle back when find no trail. He was right. Their reprieve would be temporary. They needed a more permanent solution than simply running and hiding. Martha studied the terrain ahead, mind working on a plan that might give them a fighting chance. The plateau was dotted with massive boulders, some balanced precariously atop smaller stones, the result of centuries of erosion and geological forces Martha didn't understand, but could potentially use to their advantage. Those rocks, she said, pointing to a particularly unstable-looking formation directly in their path to the hills. If we could dislodge them as the bandits pass. Tatanka followed her gaze, immediately grasping her plan. Yes, rockfall. Good trap. They moved as quickly as Tatanka's condition allowed, reaching the formation before the bandits had circled back. Up close, the massive boulder was even more impressive, easily weighing several tons and balanced on a much smaller base that had been partially eroded by the previous night's storm. How do we bring it down? Martha wondered aloud. Tatanka examined the formation with a critical eye. Need leverage. He spotted a fallen tree branch nearby, dragged there by floodwaters. This worked. Together, they positioned the branch in a natural crevice beneath the boulder. It formed a crude but potentially effective lever. When pushed with enough force, it might shift the giant stone from its precarious perch. Now hide, Tatanka instructed. Wait for them pass. They concealed themselves behind nearby rocks, the lever positioned so that they could reach it without exposing themselves fully. Now came the hardest part: waiting. Time crawled by with excruciating slowness. Martha's joints stiffened in the cooling night air, and she flexed her fingers repeatedly, knowing they would need to move quickly when the moment came. Beside her, Tatanka's breathing was shallow, but steady, his focus absolute despite his injury. Finally, the bandits appeared, moving more cautiously now, as they realized their quarry had eluded them. They were spread out, searching systematically across the plateau. "They gotta be heading for those hills," the leader said, pointing ahead. "Fan out and keep your eyes sharp." As the men spread out, Martha's heart sank. For the trap to work, they needed all three to pass beneath the boulder simultaneously. But then the youngest rider called out, pointing to the ground. "A blood trail here. They came this way for sure." The others converged on his position directly in the boulder's path. It was now or never. Martha and Tatanka threw their combined weight against the lever. For a terrible moment, nothing happened. The branch bent, but the boulder remained immobile. Martha pushed harder, feeling the wood begin to splinter beneath her hands. "It's not working," she hissed, panic rising in her throat. "Again," Tatanka urged. Together, they repositioned, finding better footing. On a silent count of 3, they heaved against the lever with every ounce of their remaining strength. For a heartbeat, nothing changed, and then a subtle shift, a groaning crack, and the massive stone began to tilt. Pebbles showered down, alerting the bandits, who looked up in alarm. The youngest was already turning to run when the boulder broke free completely, gathering deadly momentum as it crashed down the slope. "Look out!" one of the bandits screamed, but too late. The boulder struck with a sound like thunder, taking smaller rocks with it in a lethal avalanche. The leader and the third man disappeared beneath the rock slide, and their screams cut horribly short. The young bandit was thrown clear as his horse reared in panic, though the animal's leg was crushed beneath a smaller boulder, pinning the rider beneath its thrashing body. "Run," Martha urged, pulling Tatanka away from their hiding place as dust billowed around them. But something made her pause, a pained cry from the young bandit. Despite everything, Martha couldn't simply leave a wounded man to die slowly, even if he was her enemy. She approached cautiously, Tatanka's knife in hand. The young man was trapped, his leg caught beneath his dead horse. Blood trickled from a gash on his forehead, and terror filled his eyes as Martha approached. "Please," he begged, his bravado evaporating. "Don't kill me. I'm just following orders." Martha stood over him, knife raised. This boy, for he was scarcely more than that, had been part of the group that murdered her family. Her hand trembled with the effort of restraint. "My daughter," she said, voice raw with emotion. "My grandchildren, you killed them." "I know, I swear." The young man's eyes widened. "I didn't kill anyone. I just joined up with Jackson 2 weeks ago. I wasn't even there for—" He broke off, seeming to realize his mistake. "For what?" Martha pressed, bringing the knife closer to his throat. "For the wagon attack," he admitted, swallowing hard. "I was keeping watch on the trail. I didn't fire a single shot, I swear." Martha's grip on the knife tightened. "You expect me to believe that, after you hunted us for days, it's the truth?" Fear made his voice crack. "Please, we were just supposed to rob them. It wasn't meant to end in killing." "Then why did it?" Martha demanded. The young man's eyes darted between Martha and Tatanka, who had approached silently from behind. "It was a setup," he blurted. "A deal gone wrong." "Well, what deal?" Martha's voice had gone dangerously quiet. "The deal with your man, the one who arranged it all." Martha felt as if the ground had dropped away beneath her feet. "What are you talking about?" "Your man," the bandit insisted desperately. "Whitman, he set the whole thing up, paid us to stage a robbery." "You're lying," Martha whispered, though a terrible certainty was already forming in her mind. "I'm not. Look." With shaking hands, the young bandit reached into his shirt and pulled out something that caught the moonlight with a familiar gleam. He gave this to Jackson as payment for setting up the ambush. In his palm lay Rebecca's silver locket, the family heirloom that had been passed down for generations, the one her daughter never removed. "He said you'd die alone in the desert." The bandit continued, words tumbling out in his desperation. Said no one would ever know what really happened. The plan was just to take valuables, make it look like a random attack. But your daughter, she recognized him talking to Jackson. She started screaming that he'd betrayed you all. That's when the shooting started. The knife fell from Martha's numb fingers. Elijah hadn't just abandoned her, he had orchestrated the murder of his own family. Her daughter had died, knowing the full extent of her husband's betrayal. Tatanka, who had been listening intently, spoke to Martha in his limited English. "He tell truth?" "Yes," Martha replied, her voice hollow. "I believe he is." She bent down and took the locket from the bandit's trembling hand. The familiar weight of it, the worn silver that Rebecca had polished religiously every Sunday, brought fresh grief surging through her. But alongside it rose something else, a cold, clear purpose. "What will you do with me?" the young man asked, fear making his voice small. Martha considered him for a long moment. "What's your name?" "Samuel," he answered, surprised by the question. "Well, Samuel, I'm not going to kill you," Martha said, stepping back. "But I'm not going to help you either." She turned away, the locket clutched tightly in her fist. "Wait," Samuel called desperately. "You can't leave me like this. The coyotes will get me after dark." Martha paused, but didn't look back. "You should have thought of that before you rode with murderers." She helped Tatanka away from the rock slide, continuing their journey toward the distant hills. Behind them, Samuel's pleas faded into the vast silence of the desert. They had gone perhaps half a mile when Martha stopped abruptly. "I can't," she said. "I can't leave him to die like that. Not even him." Tatanka studied her face, then nodded once. "You go back. I wait." Martha returned to find Samuel still pinned, his struggles having accomplished nothing but exhaustion. Without a word, she began gathering rocks to create a lever, similar to the one they'd used for the boulder trap. "Why are you helping me?" Samuel asked as she worked. "Because I'm not like you," Martha replied simply. "Or Elijah." It took nearly an hour of painstaking effort. But eventually Martha managed to shift the horse's carcass enough for Samuel to pull his crushed leg free. The limb was badly damaged, possibly beyond saving, but he was alive. "Thank you," he gasped through pain-clenched teeth. "Don't," Martha cut him off. "I didn't do this for gratitude. I did it because I won't become what I despise." She stood brushing dust from her hands. "You have water in your canteen and a pistol in your belt. That's more than I had when I was abandoned." She turned to go, then stopped. "One more thing. If you survive and ever see Elijah Whitman again, tell him I'm coming for him." The remainder of their journey to the hills was arduous, but uneventful. By nightfall, they had reached the shelter of a shallow cave, exhausted but safe for the moment. Tatanka's condition had deteriorated again, his fever raging despite Martha's care. As she changed his bandages and applied fresh poultices, Martha's mind churned with the revelation of Elijah's treachery. The full horror of it seemed impossible to comprehend, that he could arrange the deaths of his own wife and children for what money freed him from responsibility. "You troubled?" Tatanka observed his perceptiveness undiminished by fever. "I thought I knew the depths of Elijah's cruelty when he abandoned me." Martha replied, her hands continuing their careful work. "But this, to plan their deaths. Some men," Tatanka said slowly, searching for the right words, "have empty place where heart should be." Martha nodded, finding the simple description painfully accurate. "If I survive this, I'll find him," she vowed. "He won't escape justice." Tatanka's expression was solemn. "First we survive." The next morning brought a stroke of unexpected fortune. Tatanka's fever had broken during the night, and when Martha checked his wound, the angry redness had begun to recede. The worst of the infection had passed. More promising still, as Martha ventured outside to collect dew from desert plants, she spotted dust on the eastern horizon, riders approaching, but not from the direction of the bandit camp. "People coming," she told Tatanka when she returned to the cave. "Many riders." He pulled himself to the entrance, shielding his eyes against the morning sun. After a moment of study, his face brightened. "Lakota scouts. My people." Within an hour, they were surrounded by Lakota warriors who had been searching for Tatanka since he failed to return from his scouting mission. The reunion was emotional, but restrained the warriors' initial suspicion of Martha giving way to cautious respect when Tatanka explained what had transpired. They were taken to a temporary camp, hidden in a protected valley, where Martha watched anxiously as Tatanka was carried to a teepee, where an elderly woman waited with an array of medicines far more sophisticated than the emergency supplies he had carried. Martha herself was led to another teepee, where a young woman helped her clean the blood, both Tatanka's and the bandits', from her hands and clothing. Food was offered pemmican and some kind of berry preserve, which Martha accepted with murmured thanks. The normality of these simple courtesies, after days of desperate survival, seemed almost surreal. Hours later, as evening painted the sky in watercolor hues, a warrior came to escort Martha to what was clearly the chief's teepee. Inside, several elders sat in a circle around a small fire. Tatanka was there too, propped up on buffalo robes, his color improved and fever visibly reduced under proper care. "Sit," the chief instructed in halting English, indicating a place beside Tatanka. Martha lowered herself carefully joints, protesting after the past day's exertions. She was acutely aware of being scrutinized by every eye in the circle. The chief studied her in silence for what felt like an eternity, his weathered face revealing nothing. Finally, he pointed to Tatanka's bandaged shoulder. "This wound," he said, "not made by warrior. Clean, but..." He searched for the word brutal. "You do this..." Martha understood the question wasn't just about the cauterization, but about her role in everything that had happened. She met the chief's gaze steadily. "Yes, I burned it closed to save his life." The chief exchanged glances with the other elders. One asked a question in Lakota, which Tatanka answered at length, occasionally gesturing toward Martha or mimicking actions like the cauterization or the boulder trap. When he finished, a murmur passed through the assembly. The chief turned back to Martha, his expression marginally softer. "Why your people leave old woman to die?" he asked bluntly. The direct question caught Martha off guard, but she found herself wanting to explain. "My son-in-law, the husband of my daughter, he thought I was slowing them down. A burden." She paused, fingers unconsciously finding Rebecca's locket in her pocket. "And he wanted to hide his plan to have them killed." This last part was translated for those who didn't understand English, causing visible shock among some of the elders. "Your own blood betray you," the chief said, shaking his head. "Betray family. This not Lakota way." "No," Martha agreed quietly. "It shouldn't be any people's way." An elderly woman spoke up, her English more heavily accented than the chief's. "Why save him?" She gestured toward Tatanka. "You old weak, could run. Why stay?" The question surprised Martha, but her answer came without hesitation. "Because he saw worth in me when my own family did not. Because every life has value, no matter how old or seemingly useless others might judge it to be." When this was translated, the elderly woman nodded, satisfaction evident in her expression. She spoke to the chief, who listened attentively, before turning back to Martha. "Mapia asks, what now for you?" "We take you to White Settlement when Tatanka healed." Martha realized she hadn't considered what might come after survival. Return to civilization, to what she had no home, no family waiting. Continue west alone. The thought held no appeal. "I don't know," she admitted. "I have nowhere to go." The elders conferred briefly in Lakota. Finally, the chief nodded, as if a decision had been reached. "You stay. Winter comes soon. Bad time to travel. In spring decide." The offer stunned Martha. You would let me stay a white woman?" The chief's expression remained grave, but his eyes held a glimmer of something like respect. Not white woman, not Lakota woman, just brave woman who honor life. It was that simple. No grandiose declarations, just the straightforward acknowledgement of shared humanity that transcended racial boundaries. As autumn painted the landscape in russet and gold, Martha found unexpected purpose among the Lakota. Her knowledge of herbal remedies complemented their own healing traditions. Her skill with needle and thread, honed through decades of necessity, proved valuable for winter preparations. The children, naturally curious, were the first to fully accept her presence. They called her Unchi grandmother, the same term of respect used for their own elderly female relatives. Martha taught them English words, while they taught her Lakota, their laughter bridging cultural divides more effectively than any treaty. What this called, a small boy named Hoxie asked one afternoon, holding up a toy he had carved from wood. "A horse," Martha replied. "What is it in your language?" "Sunkawakan," the boy said proudly. "You try." Martha repeated the phrase, her pronunciation awkward, but improving with practice. In return, she taught him to thread a needle and make simple stitches, skills he absorbed with remarkable quickness. "Why your hands crooked?" he asked one day, touching her arthritic fingers with childish directness. "They've worked hard for many years," Martha explained. "Sometimes hard work leaves marks on our bodies." Hoxie considered this solemnly. "Like warrior scars, honor marks," Martha smiled, touched by his perspective. "Yes, exactly like that." Tatanka's wound healed cleanly under proper care, leaving a scar, but no lasting impairment. The shared ordeal had created a bond between them that transcended language and cultural differences. He became Martha's informal protector and interpreter, helping her navigate the complexities of Lakota social structures and traditions. "Why did you save me that day?" Martha asked him one evening as they sat outside her teepee. "You could have simply observed and moved on." Tatanka was quiet for a moment, gathering his thoughts. "Old ones carry wisdom," he finally said. "In my people, elders valued not." He searched for the word discarded, "seeing you left to die." He shook his head. "Wrong way." "Anna, thank you," Martha said simply. "Not just for saving my life, but for seeing value in me when others didn't." When winter arrived with biting winds and snow that transformed the landscape into something both beautiful and deadly, Martha had already been integrated into tribal life. She sat with the women around evening fires, sharing stories through a mixture of broken Lakota English and universal gestures that somehow conveyed meaning across the barriers of different worlds. Mapia, the elderly healer who had treated Tatanka, took particular interest in Martha's knowledge of frontier remedies. Together, they exchanged techniques, Mapia showing Martha how to prepare poultices from unfamiliar plants, Martha demonstrating the uses of common herbs the settlers relied upon. Their hands worked side by side, one pair smooth and copper-colored, the other gnarled and pale, but equally skilled. "Your hands speak," Mapia observed one day, as Martha carefully stitched a torn moccasin. "Many stories there." Martha looked down at her arthritic fingers, never still despite their pain. "They've held babies and buried husbands," she said quietly. "They've planted crops and harvested them, made bread and bandaged wounds. They remember everything, even when my mind forgets." Mapia nodded, understanding perfectly. Good hands, strong spirit. On the winter solstice, the longest night of the year, Martha participated in her first Lakota ceremony. As flames leapt toward the star-filled sky, she found herself thinking of Rebecca and the children. The grief remained a shadow that would never fully lift. But alongside it had grown something she hadn't expected to find again: belonging. One bitterly cold January morning, scouts brought word that a white man had been found, half frozen in the snow near their hunting grounds. He was brought to the camp wrapped in buffalo robes, his frostbitten face barely recognizable, until Martha looked into his eyes. Elijah Whitman had somehow survived the months since their last encounter, but winter had extracted a terrible toll. One eye was clouded white, permanently blinded by frostbite that had also claimed part of an ear. His once strong frame had withered to gaunt hollowness. When he regained consciousness and saw Martha sitting beside the fire in a teepee wearing clothes of Lakota design, with her gray hair braided in their style, disbelief crossed his face. "Martha," he croaked through cracked lips. "Is this hell then my punishment to find you alive, after all?" "Not hell, Elijah," she replied evenly. "Just consequences." He blinked confusion, replacing shock. "How did you survive? Where did they find you?" "They didn't find me," Martha said. "Tatanka did the Lakota warrior you shot, the one who saved me after you left me to die." Elijah's gaze darted around the teepee, as if expecting an ambush. "These savages, they haven't hurt you?" Martha's expression hardened. "The only savage I've encountered in recent months is you, Elijah." "Me?" He attempted indignation, but it fell flat. "I did what I had to do for survival. You were slowing us down, endangering everyone. Stop!" Martha cut him off, pulling Rebecca's locket from her pocket and holding it up. "I know everything." The color drained from Elijah's face. "Where did you get that?" "From one of the bandits you hired to murder my daughter and grandchildren." Martha replied, her voice deadly calm. "He was quite eager to explain your arrangement once he was trapped beneath his dead horse with a knife at his throat." For a moment, Elijah seemed about to deny it. Then his shoulders slumped, the pretense falling away. "It wasn't supposed to happen like that," he muttered. "They were just supposed to take our valuables, make it look like a robbery. No one was supposed to get hurt." "But they did," Martha said, "because Rebecca realized what you'd done. She saw you talking to the bandits' leader." Elijah's head snapped up. "How could you possibly know that?" "The young bandit told me everything. How you paid them with Rebecca's locket. How you planned for me to die alone in the desert so there would be no witnesses. How Rebecca recognized you betraying us all." A bitter laugh escaped him. She always was too smart for her own good. If she had just kept quiet, played along, then what? Martha demanded. "What was your plan afterward? Were you going to kill them later? Abandon them somewhere else?" "No." Elijah looked genuinely horrified. "I just wanted freedom. A fresh start without responsibilities dragging me down, without a nagging wife demanding children, a judgmental mother-in-law." His voice grew passionate, revealing the depth of his discontent. "Do you have any idea what it's like to feel trapped every day of your life? To wake up knowing this is all there is forever?" "So you arranged their deaths," Martha said flatly. "Your own family." "I arranged a robbery." He corrected desperation in his voice. "The deaths were an accident. If Rebecca hadn't recognized the leader, if she hadn't screamed that I'd betrayed them. But she did," Martha said. "And now they're gone. Because of you." Elijah's face crumpled, the last vestiges of his self-justification falling away. "I know," he whispered. "God help me, I know. I've thought of nothing else these past months. Their faces, their voices. I can't escape them." Martha studied him closely, seeing for the first time not the monster who had orchestrated her family's deaths, but a broken man consumed by the consequences of his own actions. It didn't excuse what he had done, nothing could. But perhaps it explained it. "And now?" she asked. "What do you want now, Elijah?" He laughed bitterly. "I'm beyond wanting Martha. I've been wandering for months, no settlement will take me in. I'm just trying to survive." The chief, who had listened to this exchange with the help of a warrior who understood English, spoke quietly to Martha. "This man. Your blood by marriage," Martha replied. "He was my daughter's husband." "He caused deaths?" "Yes," Martha said simply. "Through his actions they died." The chief's expression darkened. "Our law clear. Man who kills family." He drew his finger across his throat in a universal gesture. Martha found herself in the unexpected position of arbiter for Elijah's fate. She had every reason to hate him, to demand his execution for what he had done. Yet something stopped her. "No," she said finally. "Death would be too easy. Let him live with what he's done, as I must." When this was translated, murmurs of surprise rippled through the assembled elders. The chief studied Martha with newfound respect. "Your mercy strange to us," he said, "but we honor your choice. He live but not here. When storm pass, he go." Elijah was moved to a separate teepee, treated for his injuries, but kept under guard. In the days that followed, Martha visited him once, bringing food and water. "Why didn't you let them kill me?" he asked, genuine confusion in his voice. "Because death isn't justice," Martha replied. "Justice is living each day, knowing what you've done, carrying that weight until it either destroys you or transforms you." "And you think I can be transformed?" Disbelief colored his tone. Martha shook her head. "I don't know, Elijah. That's not for me to decide. But I know I won't become like you, someone who takes life without thought for its value." When spring finally softened winter's grip, Martha stood outside her teepee, watching children play in the center of the camp. The past months had transformed her, as surely as the seasons had transformed the landscape. Her hands remained gnarled with arthritis, her back still stooped with age. But she carried herself differently now, with the quiet dignity of someone who had faced the worst life could offer and emerged stronger. Tatanka approached his step-ladder with the return of warm weather. "Council meeting soon," he said in the improved English that their daily conversations had fostered. "Chiefs talk about moving camp for summer hunting. And me?" Martha asked the question that had lingered since winter began. "Will I go with you?" Tatanka's expression was solemn, but his eyes were warm. "Your choice. Always your choice." Martha considered the alternatives. She could ask to be taken to the nearest white settlement, perhaps find passage east to distant relatives, or west to the California her family had sought. She had proven her resilience. She could start again despite her age. But as she looked around the camp, she realized the truth that had been forming in her heart over the long winter months. Her home wasn't a place anymore. It was the people who had taken her in when she had nothing. The children who brought her wildflowers and treasured her stories. The women who had taught her their crafts and included her in their circle. Tatanka, who had seen value in an old woman when her own blood relation had discarded her. "I stay," she said simply. "This is my home now." The words felt right, an acknowledgement of what had already become reality. She had lost one family through betrayal and violence, but found another through courage and compassion. It wasn't a replacement for what was gone, but a new chapter written on the blank pages that remained. As for Elijah, when the spring thaw made travel possible, he was given provisions and pointed toward the nearest settlement. Whether he would survive in the world beyond their protection was his burden to bear. Martha had made her peace with the past. Her focus now was on the future, however many years she had left to live under the vast prairie sky, among people who valued wisdom over youth and respect over expediency. That evening, as the community gathered around central fires, Martha was asked to share a story, a regular request that honored her role as an elder. She reached into her pocket fingers, finding Rebecca's locket, its familiar weight a bittersweet comfort. She opened it, revealing the tiny portraits inside her daughter as a young woman painted years ago when they still lived in Missouri. "This was my daughter, Rebecca." Martha began showing the locket to the children gathered closest to her. "And tonight, I want to tell you about her courage, how she stood up to betrayal, even when it cost her everything." As she spoke of her family keeping their memory alive, not through tales of their deaths, but celebrations of their lives, Martha realized that she had found something she thought forever lost in that merciless desert purpose. In this unexpected place, among people once considered enemies, she had discovered that age brought not only limitations, but valuable perspective. Her 70 years were not a burden, but a resource. Her experiences not irrelevant, but instructive. The desert had not claimed her after all. Instead, it had stripped away everything but her essential self, revealing a strength she had always possessed but never fully recognized. And in that strength, Martha Lindell, abandoned, grandmother turned survivor, had found not just a way to endure, but a way to truly live.